Well now, this is the slide I skipped. Here we are on slide 28, pathogenic fungi and protists and the diseases they cause. It's good right now to make sure we all know what pathogen and pathogenic mean. Pathogen is an organism that is able to cause a disease. Pathogenic, it means able to cause a disease. So let's skip ahead through those slides we already looked at, and we'll get to this one, informal classes of pathogens. This is something I do that is not a standard thing in microbiology, but I classify diseases partly in this way whenever it's appropriate. So let me show you what I'm talking about. Some diseases are caused by toxins that microorganisms make. Food poisoning is an example of this, where the only thing that causes the disease is the toxin. It doesn't matter if the organism you're eating is dead or alive. The toxin it made is what's going to make you sick. So botulism is an example of this. And so I will put this in the upper right corner when I first introduce a disease that's just an intoxication. This would be an irritation, and what you're seeing here is villi in the intestine with bacteria all over them causing an inflammatory response. And in these cases, sometimes I'll call it inflammatory. In these cases, the microorganisms grow on a person or in a person, but they don't cross an epithelial barrier. So they're going to be in the lumen of a gut, or they're going to be on the skin, etc. And the signs or symptoms we see from these are caused by the immune response, usually. And then the last one are the invasive diseases. These happen when a pathogen does cross an epithelial barrier and spreads to different parts of the body. It could be spreading a few inches away, or it could go through the bloodstream to completely different organs. And what you're seeing here is another diagram from a different paper that's showing ways bacteria cross epithelial layers in the gut. Dendritic cells can pull them out of the lumen, and pathogens can just survive in the dendritic cell and hop out of the dendritic cell. Other pathogens just trick a cell into using vesicular transport to moving them across the layer. Okay, so you will now know what you're seeing when I show you those pathogens. So here is one. So we're starting with fungal intoxications. These are diseases caused by mycotoxins, that is, toxins made by a fungus. So the first one we start with is a big one. It's aflatoxin. Aflatoxins are small molecules that are made by Aspergillus species. Aspergillus are ubiquitous fungi all over the world. They grow outside, but they also grow on food products that are being stored. The scary thing about Aspergillus is that if you have a tiny bit of water present on something like a grain you're storing in a plastic bag, if there's a tiny bit of humidity, Aspergillus can grow and start breaking down that grain in the bag, and in the process it releases water metabolically, and that allows it to grow even better. And so it's kind of a terrible thing, but if it gets in there and grows, it's kind of a cycle. It's a feedback cycle. So the point is, it causes everything from allergic reactions to chronic liver damage and liver cancers. So usually in the US, we're not exposed to very much aflatoxin, or not exposed to many aflatoxins, I should say, because there are different ones. But if we look at sub-Saharan Africa, half of the cancers we see there are liver cancers, and a large fraction of the foods available to people there have aflatoxins. So people in sub-Saharan Africa are going to be routinely exposed to aflatoxins, and it does elevate their risk of cancer and liver damage. And there have been specific outbreaks where we can trace it to one batch of food that's highly contaminated, and one, for example, killed 100 people that we know about. So that's aflatoxin. We have to test imported foods for aflatoxins. Ergotism is the next one, and this is the famous one that is. Some people think this, if you're poisoned by this, you will hallucinate. Other people don't. Anyway, certain grains can allow this fungus to grow, and it will make this thing, this sclerotium that will come out the side, and that contains ergot. And ergot causes central nervous system disruptions like numbness, convulsions, paralysis, etc. And it can be metabolized into a hallucinogen, but if you just ate this, I think you would experience these things. This is one that can happen in the U.S. or does happen more in the U.S. Mostly subsistence farmers would be exposed to this. Mushroom poisoning is something you've probably heard of for people who go hunting mushrooms. And we will look at mushroom poisoning caused by a couple different kinds of mushrooms. Specifically, this is Amanita phalloides, or the death cap, and it causes the majority of fatal mushroom poisoning. The majority of mushroom poisonings are not fatal, but the fatal ones tend to be caused by this. And you can look at a half-day long incubation time. So between eating and getting symptoms, there'd be roughly 12 hours. And a person would get abdominal symptoms that would lead to dehydration and low blood pressure from things like vomiting and watery diarrhea. And then the patient would feel better for a few days, and then the liver and kidney will start to fail and either kill the person or lead to a very slow recovery. And there are no treatments or antidotes to these poisons. But if you can support a patient's liver and kidney function, you can sometimes keep them alive. So that is mycetism caused by Amanita phalloides. More common mushroom poisoning is non-inflammatory gastroenteritis. So this just means infection of the gut. So any disease that causes diarrhea and vomiting could be called anything that causes diarrhea could be called gastroenteritis. And there are lots of different species that can cause this. And what's distinctive about these is this very short incubation time. So if you eat these mushrooms, within 2 hours, you'll be vomiting and having diarrhea. So that's intense. So what it comes down to is if you don't know a lot about mushrooms, don't eat mushrooms that you picked yourself. These are fungi that, instead of being eaten, these grow on our skin. The first one and the main one are dermatophytoses, caused by dermatophytes. And these are common things like athlete's foot. Lots of different fungi can cause them. And what they do is they can secrete an enzyme that breaks down the keratin in skin, and that gives them a source of food and the ability to live there. But they don't invade living tissues. That's why I gave them this icon. So people get them from direct contact with things like pets, but only in situations where there's humidity. So athlete's foot, for example, is named that because people would get it from shower rooms, like locker rooms. So if skin touches a surface in a locker room, that skin is at risk of getting one of these dermatophytoses. And again, phyto means plant. So people used to name microorganisms after plants. It doesn't make sense. These are different types of cutaneous mycosis or dermatophytosis. And they're just named after where they happen in the body. let's see. So you can read through that. And so here's a little bit more detail on all of them. And I don't have more information for you than what is in these slides. So I'm just going to scroll through them and you can read through them. And then on this slide I have some pictures. The one thing I will point out is that ringworm, head ringworm, nail ringworm, and body ringworm on the previous slide. Yeah, there are no worms involved. It's fungus. But ring comes from the fact that you would see an expanding patch of inflamed tissue. And then this is where they're infecting the nail, and they're causing the nail to be yellowed and brittle. So how do we treat them? Well, there are topical antifungal medications like imidazole. And if a person is very sick or has a suppressed immune system, and these fungi can get out of control, that is treatable also. But really, air and dryness are what stop them from growing. And we can prevent transmission if we keep people away from cats, dogs, and farm animals. So that's where a lot of people will get them, is from animals, and showers, etc. So those were the cutaneous mycoses or dermatophytoses. Next we have Candida albicans, and I've mentioned this a few times. It is a mitosporic yeast, which means no one has ever found sexual reproduction in it. Why does that matter? Well, that matters because fungi are classified based on their type of sexual reproduction. The same way that we can classify plants based on their flowers. The flowers are the sexually reproducing parts, and those are the slowest parts of the plant to change by evolution. In the same way that in these fungi, the sexually reproducing structures are the slowest to change by evolution. So you can classify them and come up with a phylogeny based on their sexual reproductive structures. So mitosporic yeast doesn't have any. And that means until we had things like DNA analysis, we didn't know where they went in the phylogeny. So, Candida albicans is a member of the normal human microbiota. That means it lives on us and in us and doesn't cause any diseases. And we would find it on the skin, in the mouth, in the vagina, and in the intestines. But it also causes lots of disease states, as we will see. So in that book I showed you, Clinical Microbiology Made Ridiculously Simple, this is an example of one of the mnemonic devices. As clinicians, you'll see it again and again. It's given out like candy. See, candy, candy, see? It's what it is. So the first of these diseases is thrush, or oral candidiasis, I believe it is called. And this is caused by dysbiosis. So we typically think this is going to happen whenever the normal microbiota, like the bacteria that should live there, if they're disrupted and unable to grow, then a person might get thrush. And there are treatments for this. We have antifungals we can use, and that's what you would see, a mixture of the yeast themselves and, I believe, white blood cells. Vaginitis, or a yeast infection, is a similar condition where Candida albicans grows because the normal bacteria that are there are unable to prevent it. Normally, the vagina has that low pH caused by lactobacillus bacteria that release lactic acid. And they do that because the epithelium lining the vaginal canal releases sugars that they can use as an energy source. And the other sort of antimicrobial chemicals released into the vagina are not toxic to lactobacillus. They're much more toxic to everything else. So Lactobacillus are kind of invited to grow there, and when they're not doing their job, that's when you would get something like Candida albicans, or many other diseases. And so when do we see that kind of dysbiosis? When do we see that disruption of the bacterial community? Well, somebody taking broad-spectrum antibiotics will kill the lactobacillus. But any major hormonal changes like pregnancy or things caused by contraceptives or just changes in the menstrual cycle, those can cause disruptions to the lactobacillus and the basic chemical environment of the vagina. And there are treatments for this that are straightforward. Other places we would see Candida, and this again is a diagram from that same book, and I'll walk you through this in a minute, is in people who are immunocompromised, such as people who have HIV, the human immunodeficiency virus. If it's not treated, that virus leads to AIDS, or acquired immunity deficiency syndrome. In that syndrome, a person loses their T cells. And as their T cell count decreases over years, they go through different phases where they have different kind of health impacts because of that. And so what this is showing you, this is part of a bigger graph on the following slide. And what it's showing you is this line represents the T cell count over time. So this is years roughly, and this is T cell count. And this line started at around 1,000 with a healthy person, and by the time it gets down around 400, a person will get extra cases of cutaneous mycosis or candidiasis or other infections that a healthy person wouldn't get as often. As the T cell count gets even lower, like down to 200, a person could get, I believe there's some, no, these are not Candida. Sorry, I got carried away. But different diseases that never affect healthy people become really significant once a person's T cell count gets below like 200 or 250, and then once it goes below 50, a person doesn't survive for very long. So under normal circumstances in a healthy person, Candida is not going to penetrate tissues or even cause really inflammation. But a person with a lower T cell count can't control it. And that tells us that the T cells are controlling Candida most of the time. So no one really understands why it's able to grow in us without causing disease sometimes, and it causes disease at other times. That's not really a perfectly understood thing, but partly our immune system plays a role in that, and partly the other microorganisms that grow in us play a role in that. What happened? Oh, diaper rash. Yes, that's another thing. This is that whole graph. And what I would point out is that the person who draws viruses and these different microorganisms in this different way. So if you look up here, this is a fungus, whereas this is a protist, and you just get that pretty quickly as you read this book, and it makes it easier to draw mnemonic devices like this. So I'm going to end this video here because this is the end of the intoxications and irritations or inflammations. So I will see you at the next video.